Just a few minutes, 45 minutes or so, and Rebecca's going to come and give you a report of what happened at annual conference, just for a few minutes. She'll be a good 45 minutes or so, I know.
He keeps pushing that. I just came from Deer Run, and he wanted me to take over the sermon time there too. So, but this is going to be brief. And another thing, I never fully appreciated the mad dash that this man has every Sunday morning from church to church. You hardly have time to say a word to people. So good morning. And as most of you know, I was the delegate from our charge for annual conference a couple of weeks ago in Buchanan at Wesleyan College. And so, as is tradition, I'm giving a brief report. Brief, you get? A brief report on some of the things that happened at conference, and especially probably my take on it. In the next couple of days, you'll be getting via email, church email, a conference report, a summary, 5-page summary of some of the things that went on at conference, the highlights, of course. So be sure that will fill you in perhaps more than I will do today. The theme of conference was be invitational, make disciples, and be inclusive. And no matter what the gathering was, whether it was business or worship or music, those were the themes that were actually repeated and repeated. And I guess they bear repeating because we all know that the major denominations have been losing membership over the recent years. And in fact, United Methodist membership is down 1.5% over last year. And the other statistic they gave us was that 61% of Americans do not have a church home. So, you know, it's only natural that they would be coaching us, telling us that we need to broaden our reach, to invite other people in, to learn how to be in relationship with others that are outside of these four walls that we sometimes, unfortunately, church becomes more of a club than an outreach for God. So we were reminded again and again of that. They've even developed programs, you know, like where coaches can come to different congregations and teach you how to be invitational. And so it's a huge push for us to reach out. You know, if anybody, when people ask me about, you know, how did conference go, and my first words are, well, it was very, very busy. And absolutely every minute of every day, there's something scheduled in some place you need to be. I'm not exaggerating. And, you know, I was in the choir, and so there were rehearsals about 3 times a day. And then there were business meetings and worship services, early morning worship with communion, and then late evening vespers. So there was plenty of opportunity for worship, and it was really such meaningful, good worship. And the music was fun. I really enjoyed singing in the choir. So that was all very positive. Probably one of the most meaningful things I attended at conference was by accident, which most meaningful things happen by accident. But I was on my way to an early morning choir rehearsal and ran into Helen Markwell, and she said, why don't you come to breakfast with me? So in a smallish room and over the chapel, Living Faith High School was having a breakfast. And so I went along, and there were probably about 18 or 20 people, and we were served a breakfast, very simple African food that was absolutely delicious. So then Marilyn talked about, and Helen talked about the ministry. I was struck anew. I know many in our charge, pardon me, many in our charge sponsor students and contribute in some way to that ministry. But to think about Marilyn, you know, giving up her home, selling her home, and she and Helen actually built that mission from the ground up. And you just can't imagine the roadblocks that they must have run into and had to overcome to make it a success, and it certainly does seem to be a success. They're also not only having to raise money for students, but the community around the students, there's always needs. For instance, pregnant women who have AIDS, if they're given a particular vaccine for so many weeks or doses before delivery, then the child is born AIDS-free. So it's a tremendous thing. And so I was struck by the people there, too, as being so dedicated. Most everybody there, I was a newbie, but most everybody was part of the mission program. They not only supported it financially, but they also supported it, giving a lot of their lives and attention to it, traveling to Africa, to Kenya, once or twice a year. And there was an older woman that taught sewing and taught gardening, dance, music, things that these people are not exposed to. That was quite meaningful. And in that regard, you know, being among hundreds of people of faith was quite uplifting. In our world today, we hear so much that is not positive, wars and things that just make us feel like our world is hopeless. But to be among so many people whose prime concern is reaching out to others and supporting church activities was quite refreshing. I was also impressed with our bishop. She was quite in charge of everything, and her schedule was horrendous. She was in charge of, worship services and the business meetings, which was the entire chapel filled with hundreds of people. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to keep a group of 6 or 8 people at a committee meeting on track with them. But she was managing that very well with a tremendous crowd of people. There were microphones around the sanctuary where people could offer their comment or their support or their disagreement with a particular issue that was before the congregations. And she was respectful and kept everything on track, and her knowledge of parliamentary procedure was just amazing. So that was quite a positive thing for me to be able to see. Also, many of you will remember clergy that I got to see that was nice. Bob Anderson, Carl Tribbett, Frank Shomo and Michelle all sent wishes to you all. Please tell your people hello, they all said. And recounted Franklin as being an appointment that they really looked fondly upon. Frank retired this year. Frank Shomo retired from ministry this year, so I was there for that ceremony. And he was given a very prestigious citation that highlighted his work in ministry. He was a district superintendent and was quite valued, it would seem, from all the comments, on the cabinet of the United Methodist Church. So it was good to see that. Something else I didn't know I was going to get to see, David, was to see Cassie receive her local license, pastor license, and that was a nice surprise, and I know you all were pleased.
Yeah, it was a surprise for us too.
well,
The night before.
Oh, is that right? And you made the trip. Good. It was very nice. I think I've hit just about everything. One thing, I'll skip back to the business for just a minute. Like I say, you can read about this, but one of the budget went up about $470,000 this year for the Methodist Church for the state, and 3/4 of that, understandably, is health care insurance. So they tried to make cuts in other ways and be diligent about what kind of obligations they put on congregations, but some of that will be trickling down to us. So, but of course the highlight for me the whole week was to see our own Pastor Mike here and his lovely little family gathered in front of the bishop, receive his stole with mentors and friends gathered around, laying hands on his shoulders as the bishop gave him his a blessing. I was quite proud to be there and stand in support of him, and that was very much a highlight. And so, congratulations. I'm a little disappointed he didn't have his vestments on this morning, just not that I expect him to wear them, but yeah, that's what I thought. So you know, when I started packing for conference, and I realized what I had agreed to, you know, staying in a dorm with sharing a bathroom on the 3rd floor of a building that didn't have an elevator, I had to wonder what I was thinking when I agreed to do this. But it was a very good experience. You know, sometimes it's good to get out of your own little box of life, and it gave me a whole lot better view, understanding of the Methodist Church. And I was quite glad to see the Franklin town limit signs, though, as I returned. So, thank you for contributing to sending me.
All right. Our scripture today is 2 Kings chapter 2. I ask you to listen to the words. It says, "Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, 'Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel.' But Elisha said, 'As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you.' So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to meet Elisha and said to him, 'Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?' And he said, 'Yes, I know it. Keep quiet.' Elijah said to him, 'Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho.' But he said, 'As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you.' So they came to Jericho. The sons of the prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, 'Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?' And he answered, 'Yes, I know it. Keep quiet.' Then Elijah said to him, 'Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan.' But he said, 'As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you.' So the two of them went on. 15 men of the sons of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they were both standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his cloak and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." And he said, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." And as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. And he took up the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. This is the word of God today for the people of God.
Praise be to God.
I think it's pretty obvious in our reading today that Elisha knew that Elijah would be called to God. However, Elisha's determined to stay beside of Elijah. And we see that as they travel to Bethel, to Jericho, and then to Jordan. As I read that this week, I almost saw it as a place in Scripture where for Elisha, it was time for the training wheels to come off. And I think Elisha wanted to hold on to his mentor, to spend as much time as he could possibly spend with him. But as they're making this journey, Elijah asked Elisha, "Well, is there anything that I can do for you?" And Elisha makes it a request. He says that he would like a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Now that wasn't left up to Elijah. But I think sometimes we read into that Elijah was wanting to do twice as much maybe as what Elijah had done. But I think what Elisha was really saying was that, well, unless God is with me as he was you, I can't continue on this journey. There is no way I can be a prophet in Israel if God is not with me. And we discover that after Elijah is taken up in the whirlwind, that Elijah's spirit does fall upon Elisha. Matter of fact, there in verse 14, he took the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha walked over. As I continue to study this week and still hear the words, and you hear me say this all the time, but we are to make disciples. We're to be disciples and make disciples. You heard it in some of what Rebecca said, the concept of reaching outside the walls. And I realize that there are times in life whenever we have to walk along beside someone else. I thought I'd test your memory this morning. How many of you remember learning to walk? Nobody? Well, I don't feel too bad either. I didn't remember either. But I thought about that. I'm sure whenever we learned to walk, there was a time, whether it was mom, dad, or somebody, there was a time there that people kind of walked beside us. They held our hands till we were able to, or they were able to finally let go, and we took those first few steps. Something maybe a little bit more easier for you today. How many of you remember riding a bike or learning to ride the bike? Oh, that's a better response. But there was a time with that bike that you had training wheels, and then there was a time that those training wheels had to come off. Sometimes there was somebody to walk beside you. But there still came a point in time when you had to try it on your own. As I was able to spend a couple days in the hayfield this week, I remember the time that I spent with my granddad and even my dad, riding around the fields. You probably couldn't even get kids today to even ride around the field with you, but that was something we looked forward to. But even when I was too little, because driving a tractor was a little bit different than driving a vehicle. Because driving a vehicle, I remember riding on my mom or dad's lap and steering. But I always remember the rule with the tractor, until you got big enough, you could reach the clutch and the brake, you couldn't drive the tractor. But I remember riding around those fields. Dad would say, or Granddad would say, well, this is how you do this. And like I say, they were showing you how to rake the fields. But in all those things, in all those instances, there comes a point in time, going back to the bicycle illustration, that you got to take off the training wheels and try it yourself. But what makes that so difficult? It's scary, isn't it? Like I say, I can't remember learning to walk, but I got to think it was scary to let go of whatever, right? Scary to let go. I remember the bicycle thing. I remember being in our front yard, and I finally told my brother-in-law, just let go of the wheel. I got to go. If I crash, but I'm going. Learning to drive. Learning to rake hay and being faced with other traffic and roads and turns. How do you respond? And there again, it's just a little scary. And I got to believe, as I thought about Elisha this week, it was scary for Elisha. The mentor, the one that he had walked with, was going to be taken up to God that day. He was going to die that day, right? And Elisha's thinking, well, I got to spend as much time as I can possibly spend, but the time still came. And I still believe that's the reason Elisha made the request that he did. He was asking Elijah, I need to know that God's going to be with me just like he was you. I need to know that. It's like the bicycle. How do you know it's going to stand straight up without the training wheels on it? Yeah, just because you see somebody else do it. But how do you know that's going to work for you? And you can apply this to anything new that you do in life. Up to a certain point, somebody has walked beside you, showing you what to do. But Elisha finds out that God's with him. God's with him just like he was Elijah. But as we think about being disciples, as we think about mentoring others, because all of us here today are called to be the church and to do things. But what happens when we're called? What happens when we're asked to do? It's a lot like the disciples, and it's a lot like we like making excuses, right? Or you all don't make excuses. We do, don't we? I came across this. I've threatened to do this sometime, but maybe we will. But it's called No Excuse Sunday. But whenever we do this, it says cots will be placed in the foyer for those who say, Sunday is my only day to sleep. We will have steel helmets for those who say, the roof will cave in if I ever come to church. Blankets will be provided for those who think the church is too hot. And fans will be provided for those who... I got it messed up, didn't I? Blankets for those who think it's too cold. Fans for those who think it's too hot. There's a lot of truth in that one. We will have hearing aids for those who think the preacher speaks too softly, and cotton for those who thinks he preaches too loudly. Scorecards will be available for those who wish to list all the hypocrites that are present. Some relatives will be in attendance for those who like to go visiting on Sunday. There will be TV dinners for those who can't go to church and cook dinner also. One section will be devoted to trees and grass for those who like to see God in nature. And this might be true for some. Finally, the sanctuary will be decorated with both Christmas poinsettias and Easter lilies for those who have never seen the church without them. But excuses. We can come up with many things to keep us from whatever it is. And especially when it comes to God. And especially when it comes to the church. Whether God's maybe calling you to sing, maybe teach Sunday school, to step up and be a leader, or even, to me, as simple as going to visit others. We come up with all these reasons that we can't. And we have to know and have to understand, as Elisha did, that God's with us. I get it, it's scary. I've told you, I've shared stories with you, how do you preach when you don't know how to preach, right? And you may say the same thing even today. I get it. But how do you do that? I think, how was it on your first case when you were there by yourself? I mean, how do you explain that? I've probably shared this with you. I remember I spent a lot of time with my brother-in-law and my sister when I was young, and my brother-in-law taught us how to snow ski early on, but I remember him taking us, and you say, John, how do you do this? He'd say, just point them down the hill. Well, Can you argue with that? But when you point them down the hill, where do you end up? You know? How do you turn? What if you end up in the trees? So I get it, you know, it's the same way. I get the nerves. But sometimes we have to step out in faith. Sometimes we have to take the mantle. We have to take the cloak. And if we do that, things have a way of working itself out. You know, as I went zooming down the yard that day, bicycle stayed straight. You know. As I've learned to maybe reiki, I still don't know. I have a particular way I want it done. It's one of my struggles with teaching Loudermilk. She doesn't do it like I do it, right? But we still have to trust. Because, you know, we can't constantly lean on somebody else. Have you met those people? Have you worked with people that you got to constantly hold their hands to get something done? I hope you can handle that because I can't. Okay? It's okay for a while. But even in that, sometimes you got to say, hey, you know, I've helped. We've kept on the training wheels as long as we can, but we got to take them off, and you got to step out on your own. And I know they're scared. But see, that's what we do as a church, as disciples. We mentor people. We teach people. And there comes a time within the church that we say, hey, here it is, step up. And what we discover is the same God that was with Elijah and Elisha is the same God that is with us. So as we stand and as we sing this morning, if you'd like me to pray with you, I'll do that. If you'd like the church to gather around you and pray. But are you willing to go today where God leads as we stand and as we sing 393?